Hello, Matt.
Hello, Bill.
You can't tell, but I'm still at maximum dishevelment.
I can hear it in your voice, Bill.
I'm seriously worried I'm going to fall asleep on the keyboard in the middle of the taping. So if you stop hearing me, just say, Bill had to snooze. Press stop, and we'll call it a day.
Now, you were telling me I stopped you before you ruined the story, because I think that spontaneity is very important, and so we can't really talk before we start taping and then expect to capture lightning in a bottle twice.
We're masters of improv.
We're masters of improv. Yes, and but so you were going to tell me, before we get into politics and whatnot, that you literally, did I hear this right? You go, for your daughter to take a nap, you have to get in a car?
Right. So two things here. Number one, I'm on my second child.
Yeah.
So I'm particularly exhausted dealing with all the nighttime interruptions and the like. And so that is a contributing factor to thwarting the nap strategy for my eldest daughter, who is pushing 3, and she will not nap unless she is in a car, and even then it's at best a 50-50 proposition. It's very streaky.
Mm-hmm.
So for a long time I'll take a chunk. I'll essentially take my lunch break and drive around town. And thankfully, I have a hybrid, so it's not completely sticking it to me to do that. But it's a little insane to have to do it every single day. And so sometimes she'll nap, and sometimes she won't. So sometimes you waste your hour doing it, or at least perhaps you've gone her to stay still for an hour, which is sort of the next best thing for a nap. But the worst part is, even when she gets the nap, it's all zero sum. She doesn't get more sleep at night.
Right.
So she's always under rested no matter what I do. And so now, because I got to deal with the second at night, there's less incentive for me to bother with the afternoon nap drive, and because at least I know she'll go down early when she's overtired.
Right.
And that makes it easier to get the second one down. But then the risk then is, if she's overtired, she might be a total basket case the next day.
Yeah. The irony, too, is sometimes harder to get them to go to sleep if they're tired, which is
right. I mean, so the general thinking is, don't push your luck. Get the nap in. Better that she naps on her clock, and she'll be in better spirits after that. I think it's generally true, but I have too many competing factors here to deal with, so I can't do it with in an idyllic way. So I'm just sort of it's just amazing to me. One thing I did not realize for becoming a parent is how much my life would be dictated by other people's sleep.
It's amazing,
and how much it would deprive me of my own sleep.
When you think about these, Ken Cuccinelli, who's the Attorney General in Virginia here, wildly popular.
So you know how to get his kid to sleep? I would vote for him if he could tell me that.
That's not where I was going, but that's funny. He's got, I don't know how many kids, like 7 or, I don't know, a lot of kids. And I think Rick Santorum has a lot.
Is he in the Quiverful movement?
They're both Catholic.
He's Catholic. He's not Quiverful then. And Quiverful is evangelical.
No, they're both Catholic. I think they're probably both homeschool in some cases. But the point is, how are they successful? It's unbelievable that, it's one thing to sort of get by, but when you have that many kids, I don't want to, children are a blessing. I think we can agree on that. But the obstacles, the challenges that arise, certainly you could be successful, but to be the time and look, by the way, there was a mini scandal the other day that Rick Santorum is apparently not that well traveled. That despite the fact that he was in the U.S. Senate for 2 terms, and I think I forget which committee, but a committee that might lend one to travel, that he really wasn't well traveled, and he said that it's because I believe he said it's because he had a young family. So Anyway, kudos to you.
If that is true, then I think he deserves applause for that, and not derision.
Yeah.
It would probably be bad if every single senator did not take foreign trips. There's obviously value to be had by doing that, but it's also not bad to have there be some people in elective office who can manage their families and not have to have breakneck schedules. There's more than one way to be a legislature, and it's worthwhile to have different kinds of legislators.
And let me say,
people different experiences.
That sort of commonsensical statement is why this show is called the DMZ. And maybe, do you think we should go back to, I'm Ed Lewis, and I'm Bill Scher, and this
I am Bill Scher.
The DMZ.
We are in the DMZ.
That. And you're in.
President Obama is going to be in the Korean DMZ next week.
Yes. Maybe he can.
And it might be he's doing this to help promote the show. I'm not sure. We didn't pay him.
This is good synergy. Very good synergy. But what do you think? Should it be like, you're in the DMZ?
It's like you're in the no spin zone. You're in the DMZ.
Yes, and we're looking out for you. By the way, you're not using that microphone with all that reverb on it today, are you?
I have my super fancy microphone here. No question. This is professional stuff. But I'm not in my downtown office, which is an echo chamber. I think that was why I sounded so robust.
You sounded great last week, and I sounded horrible in comparison. I think that it doesn't matter. I mean, I hate to say it doesn't matter how good we sound, but what matters is the consistency, that we both sound about the same level of crappiness or goodness. So chime off in the comments. I do have a microphone I could attempt to plug in that may make me sound better.
Well, if you want this microphone, let's do some product placement while we're here. This is the Yeti.
The Yeti.
YETI. The Yeti USB microphone.
I've got a microphone I use for my podcast. I don't know if it's that great, but I could try to plug it in if it would make us sound, more equal.
Anyway, enough of my sleep deprivation and technological prowess. It seems like my dreams of a Burger convention are dying again.
Yeah.
Romney. I mean, it shouldn't be a surprise that Romney won Illinois. I think we're at a point where you can demographically predict who's going to win every contest because the same groups of folks generally vote for Romney or Santorum. But obviously the delegate chase, I believe Ed Kilgore at the New Republic said, I did the math, he's going to get it. He's going to get out to a majority or very, very close enough that he could scoop up the last few at the convention. So let's stop kidding ourselves. But every single time he has won a big contest, the very next day, usually himself, but in this case his advisor, says something incredibly stupid to kill any sense of momentum and make the next day's story about Romney's weaknesses and not Romney's momentum. And this time it was his top aide, Erica Fernstrom, saying that in the fall election the campaign will be like an Etch A Sketch. You shake it up and you start clean.
And the problem wasn't just what he said; it was the context. The context makes it worse. The question was basically, are you moving too far to the right now? Is it going to be harder for you to come back to the center? And that's when he said it. So really, this sort of, what hurts on so many levels, I mean, obviously it reinforces a pre-existing narrative that Romney doesn't really stand for anything, that he's going to change his positions. But it also hurts him from two directions. The left wants to make a big deal out of this to sort of show, okay, if he does start to moderate, he's predicting it. He's telling us that he doesn't stand for anything. And the conservatives are ticked off because this, confirms their worst fears about it. So it really was a very devastating gaffe.
But it's so devastating.
For being superficial, for being as superficial as it was, it's quite damaging.
Well, I have two questions for you. But as first, there's some of the news coverage of this tries to suggest that his opponents are being a little unfair about it by saying, first we didn't literally say that Romney is the Etch A Sketch, that he, the person, is the Etch A Sketch, but it's just an example of how an inartful comment gets exploited by his opponents. I mean, is there a alternative way to interpret the comment that doesn't suggest Romney is going to either change positions or change rhetorical style or what have you, or is it just the only way it can be interpreted is he's running like a conservative, now he's going to run like a moderate later?
Well, I think you have to be very, very generous to Fernstrom to come up with a theory that this was completely innocuous and that it was completely misinterpreted. Because again, a lot of times when people commit gaffes, they're taken out of context. In this case, I would argue the context actually makes it worse. The more you know about this, the worse it looks. So the CNN question, having that part of it, which was specifically asking, will it be harder to go to the center? The question actually makes the answer worse than if you just sort of isolated the answer. I suppose one could be very generous and just say, well, that's what Republicans have been saying for generations. Like Nixon said that you go to the right during a primary and you go to the center during the general election, and that's common sense, and that's how we can beat Barack Obama, and everyone does it. The problem, though, of course, I wrote a piece today at the Daily Caller laying out three problems. Like, number one is the obvious problem that Mitt Romney 10 years ago was forcefully arguing that he was pro-choice. So people are already skeptical of him because of his past positions. He really has changed. I mean, at the age of 55, he was adamantly pro-choice, and at some point then had an epiphany that he should be pro-life. So a lot of people think he's a businessman who's trying to sell us what he thinks we want to buy. That's the obvious problem. I also brought up the fact that what the hell is Eric Fernstrom doing on TV? I mean, he's a strategist. He should not, in my opinion, this notion that strategists should be surrogates and spokesmen is insanity. These are people who make sausage, and they're not necessarily the kind of people you want to trot out on TV. I mean, he seems very, kind of smug and very, he doesn't feel conservative. And that's fine. If he were Haley Barbour's strategist, it might be kind of cool and refreshing and might provide balance for him to have kind of a slick Hollywood. I think the guy's from Massachusetts, but he seems Hollywood to me, consultant. But this just reinforces the narrative that Romney's not like you. He's not a regular guy, a regular conservative. And then lastly, and before I shut up, is just the fact that Romney has not built up a reservoir of capital, political capital among conservative writers and opinion leaders. I mean, if someone working for Marco Rubio said something equally silly, Eric Erickson will come out and say, this is nothing, this is a nothing burger, he misspoke. Hot Air Ed Morrissey would be, coming out and saying this is nothing. I know Rubio is not gonna sell out, but no one's there to defend Romney because the record speaks for itself, and he has not built those relationships with the people that should be defending him.
Well, I think this raises a couple of questions with me. One, if a strategist like Fernstrom is functioning as a surrogate, does that raise the question, how good is Romney's army of surrogates? I mean, I think he clearly has more surrogates than Santorum and Gingrich have had. And there have been examples where, like in Florida, for example, all the Romney surrogates were going to the Gingrich events and shadowing him and getting quoted in his stories and throwing him off his game. But that may just be an example of how weak his competition is. It may be that because Romney is so weakly supported within the party structure that he doesn't have a lot of people to go on TV besides himself.
That could be, Bill. I think it's much more likely that political strategists nowadays want to be celebrity consultants, and they want to be on TV.
But I can't believe he went rogue on TV. I can't believe he just made a decision by himself to show up. I mean, this is a pretty inner circle Romney guy. Right. He's not an outlier advisor.
Well, I mean, everybody if I was the executive editor or the boss at the Daily Caller, and someone called and said, we need someone to go on Hannity tonight, I could say, I'd like to go on Hannity. Or I could say, maybe if we're talking about contraception, maybe I should send Alexis or Michelle instead, because they might be better.
If this is a professionally run campaign, which by all accounts it generally has been, you have a media policy. You have a policy about what do you do when a media inquiry crosses your transom. You don't you don't freelance it. You don't have 5 or 6 different people making the decision who goes where. It goes to a central place in the campaign apparatus. There is a media, press secretary type person, and that person makes the decision. You go here, you go here, you go here. So if there are people in that campaign who are just making their own call when they go on TV, if I'm the candidate, I'm pretty pissed off about that. That's
I'm not saying that. I don't think he was freelancing in that regard. But look, I would just say I think that Kevin Madden would probably be a better surrogate, or even Andrea Saul. And I think that it's also just an unfortunate trend where political consultants and strategists think they need to be on TV. I mean, these guys, they make the sausage, and they are the brains behind the operation, and they make a lot of important calls. That doesn't mean they're the best person to be the face of the campaign. And again, let me just say, Fernstrom might be a great spokesman if he were working I think he works for Scott Brown. So in the Massachusetts media market, he's probably fine. Or let's go the other direction. If he were flacking for Haley Barbour, nobody thinks Haley Barbour's a city slicker. Nobody thinks Haley Barbour's out of touch culturally. So Fernstrom could actually balance him out and be like, well, I got this slick consultant guy. He's smart. He's brought in the pros, the city guys, but he's also, but Haley's okay, and Haley's folksy. The reason Fernstrom doesn't work is because he reinforces what you already don't like about Mitt Romney, which is that he's not like you. You don't think he's really conservative, and you think he's out of touch, and he's like a Northeastern guy.
Well, to go to your earlier point about how the strategists are the folks that make the sausage, I think there is a bit of a trend here, and it goes beyond just campaign consultants being on TV. I see some candidates do this too, where you see candidates say things on TV that are clearly things that consultants tell you privately.
Right.
Where you answer an unflattering question where you say, well, I'm going to answer the question that I want to answer, not the question you're asking me. That's what you say in media training. So I've done media training, so I know this. But you don't say that on the air.
Yeah, Mitt Romney does that. Mitt Romney's done that at debates. And someone says...
And it's and I don't know exactly how to account for it, because part of the job of being, a campaign consultant or a manager is to get your candidate to not say things like that.
Right. No, it's the thing. The thing about seducing somebody is you don't want them to know they're being seduced. I mean, if you're going to change the subject or parry a question, the good ones you don't know that they're not answering your question.
Right.
As Lynn Nopsiger. I'm sorry, go ahead.
So I don't know exactly why this is happening more and more lately, and my operating theory is that so much political media is niche media. It's not media that gets consumed by the masses. The media that gets consumed by political junkies. And so folks have become less and less inclined to speak the language of America, and they're speaking the language of political insiders.
Right. I think you're absolutely right, and this goes to a point that I made before. We might have even talked about it, about why there's this thing about why do football coaches why do they always punt on fourth down when statistically they should always go for it. Never punt. Keep the ball on fourth down. Go for it. Statistically speaking, they would be better off doing that. And the theory,
right?
Yeah. The theory, though, is that there's limited numbers of jobs in the NFL. Only so many teams, and so your goal is if you do something that's considered unorthodox and it fails, you're done. Now, if you go out there and do what you're supposed to do, you're supposed to punt on fourth down, so you do it, and you lose, people say, well, Lewis lost that game, but he knows what he's doing. He's a smart coach. If you do something completely unorthodox, so the point is, winning isn't your most important thing. It's impressing your colleagues and being perceived as smart and part of the club. And I think that's what you have with not just candidates, but also pundits who go on TV. It doesn't really matter if you're persuading the public that you're right, because your rewards come from persuading TV producers and other media elites that you're smart.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I think you're onto something there. Absolutely.
Right, so perhaps these folks have been punished less for things like that because the insiders see it and say, well, yeah, that's the way you're supposed to do it, and the mass public isn't really watching, so you get away with it. But then every so often, and I recall Sarah Palin did something like that once, on Fox News, and then that clip got broadcast out to a wider area, that you got tripped up. It wasn't just consumed by the insider class. It got seen by a wider pool, and so you got in trouble. So here's the case with Fernstrom, where what he was basically saying is, in one respect, he's correct that once there's a general election nominee and the party divisions have had some time to heal, the types of issues that end up in the forefront might be different. The kinds of rhetoric and framing that you use is going to be different, and so the campaign's going to have a different feel to it. All that what Fernstrom was alluding to is true, but that's for campaign consultants to chew on. That's not a message to the public about why this guy.
And when he goes on TV, he should not think that he's going on as a consultant, in the sense that, let's say you brought on Ed Rollins, and Ed Rollins isn't involved in a campaign. You bring him on, and he could say that, and that's fine. But when you go on representing a campaign, you become a politician, and you ought to. And my rule of thumb for politicians is they should not talk like strategists, and they should not talk like analysts. So if you ask, basically what Fernstrom should have done is bullshit them. He should have essentially done in the movie Bull Durham when Kevin Costner is training Tim Robbins. How do you answer a question? It's like, I just want to go out there and do the best I can for the ball club, and good Lord willing, we'll have a win. That's how you do it. You don't start saying, well, look, I'm going to pitch him tight up and in. I feel like if we get him, I might even have to hit somebody, but I want to brush him back because I'm going to. You don't tell the truth. That's not what you do.
I don't understand.
That's my job. My job is to tell the truth. It's not if you're a flack, not if you're a spokesman, a surrogate for a campaign. You say, what's the best for the ball club?
That's why I don't understand why these politicians get into the expectation game all the time. Why don't they just say, we try to win every contest, we do our best, but there's a lot of contests out there. We're going to keep plugging away no matter what happens. How hard is that to say every single time?
Well, I don't know.
When you start having variations on the theme that people start trying to read tea leaves and setting you up to fail.
And Reagan obviously wasn't around for this insane media 24-hour news cycle thing. But, you can't imagine him talking about little stuff like, well, we're going to, I think we'll win by 3 points. He wouldn't do it. He talked about, big ideas and let someone else deal with the expectation stuff. But, our politicians now are getting sucked into it. And in some cases, I mostly think it's a mistake. I think they could avoid it. They could stay above the fray on the high road, and they get, it is a mistake for politicians or their surrogates to act like strategists or to act like analysts on TV. It should always be about if they ask you a question, do you think you're going to win? It should be, well, we're going to try, but let me tell you, the real problem is gas prices. That's how you do it. And then they say again, you're not answering my question. Do you think, can you win Louisiana? Well, look, we can, I'll leave that to other people who do politics. But what I do is I talk about how we can fix our energy problems. And that's what, that's how you do it. It's not brain surgery.
It's not. It's pretty much, PR consulting 101. That's why I find it strange that people who are professionals, I think the Romney team is full of professionals. I mean, they generally run, a button-down campaign despite, I think, the flaws of the candidate. And so to see someone who's a professional make a mistake like that, I just find very
But they're also arrogant, and they're also, that's the way that really smart people and really talented people make mistakes is essentially, usually kind of arrogance and smugness, I think. And they
just to tie up this part of the discussion, as bad as this looks for Romney particularly amongst conservatives, does it derail his march to the nomination because of the delegate count? Does it give that opening that, let's say if Romney's 5 or 6 delegates short, that there'll be such disillusionment with him that the other delegates could band together and deny him the nomination and bring in a new candidate or give it to Santorum or whatever?
Well, I wouldn't call it a march to the nomination. I think it's a slouch to the nomination. But I think you're right. I don't think this is enough to stop him just because there's nobody else. I mean, as bad as Mitt Romney is, who's better? Rick Santorum? Newt Gingrich? I mean, it's just, it's a huge missed opportunity for Republicans. And so I think that Romney, he ends up getting the nomination.
How mad are conservatives now at the non-candidates for not stepping up? Are people really angry that, hey, you could have taken this, and we think Secretary Obama is a total disaster, and you didn't step up, you didn't serve your country? Is it that level of anger?
I don't think so.
Or will all be forgiven in 2016?
I don't think there's anger. I think it's more like malaise. I think that, honestly, all these so-called great candidates would have had problems. I mean, you got great candidates like Rubio, who wasn't ready this time probably. He could be a great candidate in a few years. And you have people, Mitch Daniels is not, he's a horrible on TV. And he's not all that great. I don't know why people think he is. Jeb Bush is named Bush. You get on the list. There, all these guys that everyone thinks would have been perfect or should have run. I mean, Mike Huckabee is a very talented and charismatic politician. He's got issues. So none of them. I tend to think it's like a grass is always greener on the other side argument. Mostly, it's really the ultimate problem is that. We have a generation now of politicians who are kind of tainted by the Bush era, and in some cases just not ready for prime time. And I think that the bench is very strong, but they're not ready this time. But in the future, as I've said many times, Marco Rubio, Nikki Haley, Chris Christie, Pat Toomey, Rand Paul, Bobby Jindal. I don't know if I said him yet. I mean, there's a lot of talent out there in the future.
Now, the competing campaign, Barack Obama's campaign, if I can shift gears, I think they're doing something interesting in the past few days that hasn't been commented on much. He's spending a lot. He's on a road show now talking about energy, and he's mixing up appearances at solar farms with appearances in front of oil pipelines, and trying to push an all of the above energy message. And this is a pretty interesting decision to make for a campaign that is leading right now in most polls versus Romney. Anywhere from 5 to 10 points. Although I have seen a couple of dead heat polls that are still out there, but it used to be they're all dead heat polls, and now there's I think a majority where Obama's in the lead. And Obama's choosing to talk about an issue where he doesn't have a clear policy on the subject. He has been beating back the Solyndra matter for several months, arguably successfully. It hasn't blown into a huge, giant thing yet. And there's an argument that the gas price is the gas price spike is weighing him down somewhat. So instead of doing a victory lap on all things that he has done, he's talking about something where there's work left to do. And I think it's an interesting question. Is he doing this because it's a defensive measure? He knows that gas prices could weigh him down, so he's trying to get out ahead of it. Or is it a proactive measure to say, I'm not resting on my laurels, I'm not just going to talk about what has happened, I'm going to talk about what we need to do and give you a sense of what the second term is going to look like. And if that's the case, like they talk about energy, which is an issue that didn't, he got money for clean energy in the Recovery Act, but he couldn't get the more comprehensive global warming strategy capping carbon bill passed. Because it's a really complicated bill with that steps on a lot of toes. So it's not like it's a gimme that'd be easy to pass in the second term. So is he putting a fair amount of political capital on the line by saying this is going to be one of the big issues to tackle in a second term? I don't know if you think he's on. Is he doing a courageous and politically savvy move, or is he making a big misstep at a moment where he has the edge?
So. It's funny. I try to figure out Obama, and I feel like I had a much better handle on Bill Clinton in terms of understanding his political calculus. Obama, it's hard for me to figure out. The one thing that I think is true about Obama is he's really good at muddying the waters, meaning you think you have him, you think you have a clean shot on him, and he steps back and compromises a little bit, or just muddies the waters so it's not so clear. And I think without being an expert on this, without having followed it terribly closely, my guess is that this is part of that Obama playbook where he sees that the energy issue could resonate. He sees that it's concerning and dangerous, and he's gonna try to kind of muddy the waters. That's my guess. But again, don't know. I will say I've written a couple things today on my blog at the Daily Caller about Obama and energy, both sort of at the superficial level, but maybe a little bit telling. The first is Solyndra. The RNC put out a video juxtaposing Obama's statements about Solyndra, where initially he's saying that that he secured funding, or that his administration, through the bailout or whatever, secured money for them. And then yesterday he apparently said, we weren't responsible for Solyndra per se, or something like that. So that was interesting. The other thing is, I just put up a Washington Post poll that showed that in 2006, 77% of Democrats believed that Bush could fix gas prices. Today, only 37% of Democrats believe Obama can fix gas prices.
But now are those numbers flipped for conservatives too?
Yeah. So there's a 40-point spread of Democrats. There's an 18-point spread of Republicans who flip-flop. So more than twice as many Democrats have changed their tune, which I have no explanation for, because by and large I see partisans tend to be, self-serving and make convenient arguments. But for some reason, Democrats are twice as likely to have flip-flopped over.
I think there is something substantive here. Obviously part of it is just partisan desires. But, when George Bush ran, I believe in 2000, I forget it was 2004, but I think it was 2000, he said as in the campaign, I'm going to get gas prices down by jawboning Saudi Arabia. He said so that he had the capacity to do. And he was going on for a long time in 2000 about how, we don't have a national energy policy, even though it wasn't even an issue people were even talking about a lot back then.
Right.
So he sold himself as a guy who was going to do that. And one of the key parts of Obama's 2008 campaign, I think there's probably two real pivotal moments where he kind of got himself off the ropes, and one is talked about a lot, which was the race relations speech after the Jeremiah riot tapes came out. And the second, what less talked about, is the gas price spike that was going on in the summer of '08, when both John McCain and Hillary Clinton were proposing a gas tax holiday to mitigate the price spike. And Obama, this is right before the Indiana, North Carolina primaries. It was in May. It was late in the game. But these are not blue states. And Hillary was thought she could do well here, make a case that Obama can't compete in places like this, so you should vote for me. And Obama goes out with a big ad mocking Clinton and McCain, not by name, but by saying sort of politicians in Washington. Here's their same old song. They're gonna propose this gimmick, and it's gonna save you half a tank of gas, which doesn't amount to anything. And the real problem is that we don't have any long-term strategies to reduce oil consumption and build up renewable energy. And that was a pretty gutsy ad to run. And I vividly remember Joe Scarborough saying, this is political malpractice. This shows he doesn't know how to connect with working class voters. How dare he? How can he be so stupid? But he won North Carolina landslide, and he just barely lost Indiana. It was practically a draw. And that was pretty much the end of Clinton's campaign because of that. So he has a consistent message going back 4 years now, saying this is an issue that requires long-term solutions, not knee-jerk reactions.
I mean, you make a good point. I mean, I would say, the Bush example was 2006, so it's not like 2000. It was 2006. But I don't think the average person who was polled is gonna. I don't remember. I follow politics pretty closely. I don't remember Bush arguing that, although you very well may be right. And I didn't. I do remember now. What you just reminded me of, Obama, taking a different position than Hillary and McCain, but I didn't remember that until you just jogged my memory. So I think my point is, I don't think that factors in. I don't think people, that the average person remembers that Bush said or implied he could fix gas prices, and that Obama said or implied.
I fully agree. It's not that's not top of mind with the average voter. I 100% agree with you on that. But I do think there is something to the message consistency, even if it's on the back burner. It makes it much harder, for example, for a Republican to pull out a quote from Obama. If he had a quote from Obama in '08, promised he was going to drive gas prices down immediately,
right,
and then he doesn't, that would be on a loop, 24 hours a day. But he doesn't have that. He doesn't have that clip because the clips are
by the way, nobody
consistent on the subject.
Nobody fed that Washington Post story to me, which sometimes happens where interested parties will make sure that writers, see things. But so it's not like as far as I know, the RNC, for example, is not pushing this disparity between Democrats, changing their mind or whatnot. But I found it interesting, and it turned out to be quite a good conversation, to my surprise.
So I know you want to get going, but I do want to introduce our big idea segment.
We need either graphics or today's big idea. We need some sort of, maybe I can just hold up my iPhone and I don't know, play music or something when we change segments.
We both have simultaneous cardboard placards.
I was told that I would have a
big idea
placard delivered. So
it's my turn to have a big idea.
Yes.
And my big idea, I guess, is more of a gripe. That it seems like both conservatives and liberals have a very hard time admitting and readjusting when an idea of theirs is proven demonstrably wrong. And I think probably it hurts any practitioner of ideology if you're continually saying something that the rest of America sees as going differently. it makes you. I mean, it makes you the worst kind of ideologue. And the two most recent examples of this that strike me, you have TARP, which a lot of liberals, obviously there are people on both sides of the fence that weren't happy with TARP, but I think on the left you have this critique that if you give all this money, if you loan all this money to the banks, these banks are zombie banks, they're chronically insolvent, you're throwing money down a rabbit hole, you're lighting piles of money on fire, it's not that it was sort of morally wrong, it's that it was practically wrong too, it wasn't going to work. And now, at minimum, obviously the banking system has survived. Now, I think there are fair arguments to make that there are better ways to have done it. Or if you didn't do it at all would have been fine too. I mean, maybe. So I don't want to suggest that you have to, buy whole hog, the Bob Rubin view of the economy if you got that one little piece wrong. But folks could say, okay, I was wrong that you couldn't do it, there was no way it could work, the money would be lost. I still have the right to say it was unfair, they didn't deserve it, that money could have been better well spent, or what have you. But my broadest concern proved not to be true. On the conservative side, I see, you still have all the presidential candidates essentially backing the Bush tax cuts and arguing this is going to be the way to help create jobs when, job creation was not the hallmark of the Bush presidency. I mean, the Wall Street Journal had a headline, Bush's record on jobs, worst track record on record.
Was that after, I assume that a lot of that was because of job losses from 2006 to 2008.
Well, that counts, right?
Well, no, it does count.
Take that part off the table.
Well, but my point is, it's conceivable that, and I guess I'm proving your point right now, but it's conceivable that the Bush tax cuts created jobs, and then a housing crisis led to a recession, which happens in economies. There are recessions.
Even if that's the argument, and that's I think it's a generous argument. But let's just take that as the case. At minimum, tax cuts were not this magical elixir that prevented all other economic problems from arising.
Yeah.
You clearly would have had to do something else to prevent the housing bubble from occurring. And why conservatives don't say, okay, there's other reasons for tax cuts. We think it's fair. We think there should be less government. We think it's your right to keep what you earn, whatever. But I'm going to scale back and not pretend that this is the silver bullet way to create jobs, because it wasn't a silver bullet.
I think there is some nuance. I will say, in defense of intellectually honest conservatives, there definitely were people, like, for example, when Bush wanted to do rebates, tax rebates, where people would get a check from the government. A lot of free market conservatives said that that's essentially like a Keynesian stimulus. It's not going to create jobs or foster investment. That the way to do that is to actually cut marginal tax rates so that people can essentially plan on tax cuts and thereby invest money, start a business, whatever. So there is some nuance to that.
But Bush did do marginal tax rate cuts. They were across-the-board cuts, 2001, 2003.
Yeah. Well, I'm just saying, it's not like every Bush tax cut or everything that Bush did was defended or assumed to be good.
But it just seems a little strange that you're not seeing Republicans saying explicitly, let's bring back Bushonomics.
Right. Well, let's do this, Bill.
There's some sense of that running on the Bush record's not a good idea.
Yeah. Well,
but there has been a lot of effort, I feel, made to say, okay, we've learned some lessons from the Bush era,
right,
and now conservatism is improved and reformed and better prepared to take on the challenges of today. I don't feel like that process has happened yet.
And let's talk about that because, on one hand, maybe I'm proving your point by getting into a debate, but it's not good for us to it's pointless for us to relitigate, Bush tax policy. But I think your larger point is that both sides rarely will concede that anything that they did didn't work. And why is that, right? I mean, that's essentially what the big idea, or the big debate, I guess, in this case.
Right. And especially when I feel like you could acknowledge that without giving up your beliefs. No one bats 1,000. You try something out, it doesn't work, you learn from it, and then you adjust and you revise.
All right, let me say I'll give you like one example of why that doesn't happen. Do you remember a couple weeks ago I wrote a piece calling for civility, and I was promptly attacked by somebody at Media Matters. In politics, there's some maxims. Like, one is you can't make friends of your enemies by making enemies of your friends, and it seems like, in a sense, it's almost like gang warfare. Like, they say if you went to prison tomorrow, you should probably either become a Muslim or a white supremacist, or you got to be something. You don't want to be like a rugged individualist in prison.
Right.
You need to be. You got to pick a team. It could be a bad team, but you kind of need a team. And you don't really second guess that team. If maybe you shouldn't have shanked Bobby in the courtyard. Maybe can we just agree that was a little bit too much? There is sort of a disincentive to admit you're wrong or that your side was wrong because of two things. Number one, it will anger your team, and number two, you really don't get credit from the other side. Like, I do stuff all the time that I wrote a piece. Let me just give you this example. I wrote this piece, How Ronald Reagan Invented the Electric Car. And I thought it was a fascinating piece. Of course I did because I wrote it. But I got the idea. I think his name's Jurgen. It's a Pulitzer Prize-winning author. Wrote a book called The Prize. And he has a new book out. And I went to hear him speak, and he just very casually mentioned that Ronald Reagan essentially helped invent the modern electric car. And I quoted from his book, and a friend of mine named James Strock was the first director of the California EPA. He also authored a book called Reagan on Leadership. And so he was one of my sources, and I wrote this piece, very proud of it, about how Ronald Reagan invented the electric car. The piece promptly went nowhere, and I'll tell you why. Conservatives don't want to push it, because they don't gain from people knowing Ronald Reagan helped invent the electric car. Liberals don't want to push it because they don't want to give Ronald Reagan credit for helping him. So it's a piece without a constituency. And the thing that I've learned is, and I don't care, so I keep doing it, but when I do things that sort of playing against type, it does. My friends don't like it, and I don't get any props from the other side. It's very rare. I've had a few people over the years say, that Matt Lewis, he might be a conservative, and I'm talking about liberals now. He might be a conservative, but he's in a lot. He calls him it's very rare that happens. So it's much smarter if you're trying to keep from being shanked in the courtyard. It is a much wiser move to stick with your gang. And that, I think,
it doesn't seem very. I mean, that might keep you alive in prison. I grant you that argument, but I would suggest that perhaps your healthiest ideological movement should not be analogous to a prison. It should be if you can't absorb constructive criticism and take in facts to improve your theories, then you're not going to be as relevant as you would like.
Oh, no, I completely agree with you, and I would say, don't hate the player, hate the game. Like, unfortunately, this is the world we live in. That's what I'm saying, is that people tend to behave rationally, and people tend to respond to incentives. And I agree with you that it's healthier for people to deal with reality and to welcome dissent and to debate issues and ideas and to not double down on bad ideas or false premises. But I'm saying that the incentives seem to favor covering up mistakes, never admitting that you're wrong, and always defending your team. And the incentives, there are no incentives for speaking truth to power in that regard.
Well, I think there's
the other side's never going to say. The other side's never. If and by the way, I think Obama even alludes to this. I mean, it's rare that conservatives are going to be like, "Well, he did kill bin Laden." I mean, I say that all the time, but you and I both know that a lot of my conservative colleagues don't want to give him credit for that.
Well, one thing that Obama said, though, that is relevant to this, after 2 years of the Recovery Act, he publicly said, you know what, there weren't as many shovel-ready projects as we thought they were going to be. Which is a pretty, tough thing to admit. I mean, it doesn't say that the entire Recovery Act was stupid, that it didn't work at all, and they shouldn't have done it.
Right.
But it did speak to, okay, maybe we were limited in what we could accomplish quickly because there's only so much infrastructure that you could turn on a dime. And this was actually an issue with FDR when, their first round of stimulus had a lot of heavy infrastructure projects, which have a good associated with that, and that once you're finished, they last, and you get to use them after the crisis is over. But they take a long time. They don't create a lot of immediate jobs. And so they end up shifting and doing a lot of make-work type jobs, which is sort of easier to mock. And they got mocked at the time, but it did create more immediate jobs. And that's the kind of thing that Obama really didn't have the flexibility to do.
And by the way, let me say, I'm sure I'm cynical, but I tend to think that it's a tactic when Obama does it. And I'll tell you who else does it on the right very effectively is Marco Rubio. He will quite often, if you read his speeches, concede things to the other side. And I think it makes both of them appear to be open-minded and considerate. And yet I think they both probably have an agenda as well. They're politicians, after all.
Well, and you can never totally separate that out, but I think it is a truism that there were a limited number of projects that you could move quickly. That doesn't argue against doing additional infrastructure, which Obama still proposed, but it's done with the notion of, okay, this isn't going to create a zillion jobs in a week. It's going to create jobs over time, and let's do that with that expectation in mind. So you can acknowledge the failing without conceding that your entire worldview is a failure. But it requires, Obama certainly took some hits for saying what he did say, and obviously it's not an incentive to keep doing that sort of thing.
Yeah, it opens yourself up. It's so stupid and childish, but it opens you up. Like, if you don't admit something went wrong, it's like he won't even admit it. If he had the guts to admit that it was a mistake to shank that guy in the courtyard, I would respect him. And then if you do admit it, it's like, and he even had the bald-faced audacity to admit it brazenly. So anyway, let me just do a quick plug for something I wrote here, Dill. Shameless promotion, because it dovetails this. I wrote a piece at the Daily Caller, not to name drop, talking about incentives, that the conservatives have bad incentives. So if you say something outrageous, then you get talked about and linked to, and you sell books. And the sort of bad incentives of journalists, and how somehow putting a picture of Rick Santorum sunbathing topless out there is journalism. So I wade into some of these ethical conundrums, and it's sort of me shaking my fist, yelling at kids to get off my lawn. Is essentially
but here is you're essentially trying to get conservatives to be better.
Yes.
To play the game better.
Yes.
And accept that maybe some of your leading lights don't play in a way that is helpful to conservatism.
And I will say this, I've been, and it kind of undermines what I've been saying. I've received almost unanimously positive compliments for this. I'm really, it's actually very heartening to see that I've only had one person out of a lot of people who've commented. Well, I don't say comment. The comments are probably all bad if I read them. But people who've emailed me or tweeted me have been almost all positive. And it's essentially my Jerry Maguire mission statement. In fact, I titled it. The subtitle is "The Things We Think But Do Not Say." So.
Well, that might speak to something I was trying to get at earlier. I think the times when one's team is able to start opening up the eyes and absorbing the criticism and making changes is after losing a lot. And it took Democrats losing with Carter and with Mondale and with Dukakis to finally say, okay, what do we need to do differently here? What's not working right? Mm-hmm. Clinton at the time was proposing a lot of things that was not liberal orthodoxy and were tough for some liberals to swallow. And you could still argue that perhaps there are things they didn't have to swallow if they played the game differently. But at minimum, they were open to hearing somebody say "end welfare as we know it." I'm okay with the death penalty, for example, and say, okay, I'm not gonna let those things stop me from picking a guy who I think can win. And it may take more losing on the conservative side before you get to that point, but perhaps the kind of response that you just got, I mean, the general sort of low level of morale, I think it's fair to say, is out there on the right. Perhaps there's more willingness to talk about this stuff in open settings.
It might be. I'm not sure what it is, but it is heartening to see people finally saying, "Yeah, I agree."
And by the way, you want to be at a point where you don't lose so much that you'll take just anything.
Yeah.
Because that's when I think you lose your philosophical bearings. If you can take the criticism as you go, you're more likely to be able to stick to your principles and just find a better way to propose them and sell them.
Yeah, there's a fine line. You want to be just desperate enough, but not pathetic. It's like dating.
So I cut you off. Did you say something else?
I don't remember what I was going to say. It was not that important.
Okay. Well, perhaps it's 4:15. Perhaps we should wrap things up.
I think so, man. Good, as always. Good talking with you, and I think we're living up to the DMZ title.
I'm going to go out of the DMZ and into bed, I think. But it's always nice talking to you in a human-like and civil manner, as we are wont to do.
All right, buddy. All right, so you've been watching the DMZ. We're on Twitter now. Where is it? What's it? At
DMZ Show.
At DMZ Show. So check us out on Twitter, and we'll see you back here next week in the DMZ.
Take care.
Yeah.